Hi, everyone. Welcome to Flock Talk. I'm Erin Morgan.
And I'm Walker Ball, and we work for the members of the Ontario Sheep Farmers.
Today on Flock Talk, we're sitting down with producer Mark Ritchie. Thanks for joining us, Mark.
Oh, good day. Nice to see you.
Amazing. So to get us started, Mark, can you talk a little bit about your farm and share with us the reasons you chose pasture lambing?
Yeah, in 1992, my late wife Cherry and Alan and I moved to Amherst Island and started what's now known as Footflats Farm. And within 3 or 4 years, we had it built up to about 1,000 ewes. We peaked at about 1,500 ewes. We had to cut the numbers back because we were losing grazing to a wind turbine project, but that's all been completed, and some of that land is now available again. My granddaughter, Gayla Bonham Carter, and her partner, Scott Bade, have taken over, and they run Footflats Farm now. They have about 1,000 ewes, and they have plans to expand. I'm semi-retired. I've got a couple of hundred plus ewes that I lamb on grass, and I custom graze cattle. The whole farm and our grass-based sheep farming system was built from the grass up. And if probably most people have seen a curve of pasture growth in Ontario, and it's like a two-humped camel, is how I'd best describe it. There's a high hump in May and June when we get tremendous flush of growth, and then as we get heat and moisture stress, the plants slow down, and then we have the summer slump, and then if we're lucky, we have a secondary hump in the fall. If temperature and moisture conditions are good, we'll get regrowth there, which is excellent for growing out lambs and market lambs and replacement stock. So what the idea is to turn the ewes out on the grass just as the grass is growing, have them lambing about 10 days or so into the grass growth period, and then having them their lactation peaking with the best quantity and quality of feed that we've got. And then there's a problem in you don't want to try and lamb too early because there's not enough grass out there. If you lamb too late, then you miss the spring flush of growth. And then with our short season and high latitude that we're in, we get this compressed growing season where that spring flush that is absolutely sort of uncontrollable. And of course, that's what we make our hay on. So that's what it is. It's designed around the grass growth curve, the whole pasture lambing system that we've evolved.
Cool.
Wow. Yeah, that's fascinating. What are the biggest factors influencing lamb survival in your pasture-based lambing system?
Oh, like if you've got your management and your genetics and so on are in place, and genetics is very important. It's horses for courses. Like we started out with a composite ewe that was half Coopwith, and the Coopwith is a New Zealand breed that was designed to lamb unassisted and raise twins on pasture. And the flock has now morphed more and more. Well, it's now become pure Coopwith. So if you've got the genetics there, you've got the animal designed to do the job. It's very hard, I would say, to go onto a grass-based system with ewes that have a background of confinement or that are too prolific. Like you don't actually want your ewes to be too prolific for a grass system. Like too many triplets is embarrassing. There's a higher loss rate in lambs. The lambs don't do as well. They're not as good at weaning, and so on. So the idea is to get the mature ewes to have a good set of twins, and your first time lammers to raise a good single but of course, I mean, that's what you're targeting, but I mean, of course, anything can happen. But if you have the right genetics, and then if you put your management in place to make it happen, then that's what we do.
So, speaking of management, at this time of year, what does your pre-lambing management look like to get everything off on the right foot?
Well, it's an interesting question because right at the moment, if I look outside and we have, a foot and a half of wet snow and things of deep, soft snow, there's limited things we can do. I can't get out there and supplement with any grain. And later on, at the end of winter, before we get to lambing, it's going to be mud out there. And also, and if you put feed out, it's just going to disappear in the mud. The other thing is when you have large numbers of ewes that are crowding your bike and so on, when you're trying to feed out in snowy or muddy conditions, like a lot of the feed just gets tramped into the ground. So it's what's happened before. You've got to have the ewes in the right condition now. You've got to have some reasonable hay in front of them, and you've got to have your best hay, some of your best hay saved to feed out in that last 6 or 8 weeks of gestation, because that's when you get about 60, 70% of the fetal growth. It's all the things you've done in the previous 12 months actually is what gives you a ewe in reasonable shape now with reasonable feed in front of her. Typically on Groundhog Day, like February the 2nd, I go out and count all the hay I've got left. And because for us, February the 2nd represents the midpoint of winter. And I know how much hay I've got. And I was understocked last year, so I actually have a reasonable amount of hay left. And so what I've started doing now is feeding extra hay, and I'm allowing them to waste more hay. And so the actual, while some of the hay may not be very good quality, if I'm giving them more to choose from, the actual hay that they're eating the better quality. So, it's maybe 2 or 3% higher in protein than if they just had the one bale that they had to eat the whole thing. So I'm able to spoil them a bit at the moment. But like I say, other than keeping the feed up to them now, there's not a lot I can do. The groundwork was laid during the fall and back in December when we had them in good condition for breeding, to get the conception, and then just looking after them, keeping feed up to them all the time. Very important to keep mineral up to them. We've done a lot of work over the years with selenium. Now, the Great Lakes Basin's deficient in selenium, but selenium can be toxic too. So in order to get higher levels of selenium into the mineral, you actually have to work with a vet and get a vet's prescription. And for about 5 years, we ran trials. We earmarked various ewes and we blood tested them and looked at selenium levels in them. And then we were able to get more and more aggressive with the selenium. So keeping a good mineral in front of them. And once we got them on a high selenium regime, then at lambing time and at weaning time, those sort of tail end bum lambs, there weren't nearly as many of them. Like a lot of lambs that are born weak, I think, or die young. One of the reasons is selenium deficiency. And of course, some people make up for that by going round and giving them all an injection of selenium shortly after birth or whatever. But that's not practical on big numbers of grass. So if you can deliver it through the mineral, that's one of the answers that we have for that.
Wow.
That's so interesting. I mean, I know I take selenium like as a supplement, so I guess I can't be included in one of those good lambs. I guess I'm a bum lamb.
Well, yeah, but and by the same token, you need to be careful too, because too high a level of selenium can be toxic.
Right. Okay. I'll find that healthy balance, Mark.
Yeah.
Is ewe body condition something that you're looking at now? And if it is, how far out from lambing do you pay attention to that?
More and more over the years, we've adopted the approach. It's something that we look at all year. Like if you don't have them in reasonable condition in the fall, and when you're going to expose them to the ram, then you're not going to get the conception. If they're going into winter into lower body condition score, it's an uphill struggle to certainly an uphill struggle to put any condition on, quite a struggle to maintain condition too. And if you have ewes out there, say in the fall, you have ewes, and the vast majority of them are, say, in a condition of 3 or 3+, and there's some 2s there, there's something going wrong. And those animals are maybe not standing up to the system, and so they'll probably get sold as culls. There's a huge incentive to cull in Ontario, to my mind, because cull prices are always pretty strong. So why keep a ewe that you're struggling to keep condition on when you can get a good price as a cull, and they won't be competing for feed with others? And this is another thing about keeping the whole flock in the same condition score. That's where genetic uniformity is important. So if you have lots of different breeds and types of sheep through the flock, it's very hard to maintain a uniform body condition score. But if genetically they're the same breed or the same cross, it's a lot easier to manage them as a flock. And in large numbers, when they're in competition, it's easier for them to compete with each other, so you don't get them falling back. So, body condition scoring is important. I'd say it's important all year. It's no more or less important now than it is every other time of year. And another thing is, like in the summer when you've weaned, and let's say in August and September and October, you want to watch out that you don't get your ewes over-conditioned, because if you have them in too good a condition, then you're actually wasting feed. You'd be better off putting that feed into your ewe lambs or your market lambs than you would into your ewes, because at that time of the year, the ewes just need maintenance. We have a strategy in the fall that we developed is when you get into late fall, you can't, like, let's say we're getting into November and we're getting into December, you can't get them to, even if you put good hay out, really good hay out, you've got a job to get them to settle to that. They want to keep looking for a nice bite of grass. And you're only going to waste some of your best hay if you put it out, because they're ignoring it. So what we do there to kind of extend the fall grazing is supplement them with something like somewhere between about half a pound and a pound of corn. And that gives them a bit of energy. And they're still going to go out and fossick what grass they can. But that corn sort of takes you through that.
Attracts them.
That deficit. You can hold condition or put a bit of condition on them before you put the ram out without wasting hay.
Wow.
So body condition score is a 365-day year thing in my mind. And there are times you could have them over conditioned, and you're always looking for the sweet spot, but it's a whole lot easier if you've got genetic uniformity there.
Fantastic. So talk to us about managing weather conditions. So I'm sure you see lots being on Amherst Island. What strategies do you use around lambing to help navigate cold and wet and wind, to improve survivability?
Well, over the years, we've let our lambing slip later in order to avoid the worst of the weather. But, you're still going to get cold, miserable days and so on. But that's one thing that's improved. Hopefully they've got some sort of shelter in the paddocks they're in. If I had a small flock and I was transitioning to pasture lambing and so on, I'd probably have lamb in 2 or 3 paddocks around a barn that had access to a barn, so that you could deal with problems and that they could have shelter and things. But over the years, again, we've selected for ewes that seek shelter and that are good at mothering up their lambs and nursing them and so on, and kind of looking after them and sitting down with them. And if you've got robust ewes, you've got them in reasonable shape, then that's kind of the best insurance you can have. And there's nothing you can do about the fact that we're going to have some wet weather now. It's kind of an unavoidable thing, but the better the genetics of the sheep, for those situations, the better the outcome, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. So, how many ewes do you maintain in a lambing group, Mark? And do you make changes as lambing progresses?
We don't make any changes once. Well, no, I need to qualify that. We put the ewes out at somewhere between 3 ewes and 5 ewes to the acre, and
Wow.
we probably don't have groups of any more than 120 or 150 now, because over the years paddock sizes have got smaller because if all the benefits of subdividing, and you get better utilization of feed, and you're able to extend rotations and grow more grass and so on. So the mobs have become smaller, which is a help, because in big mobs, you get more big mobs in big fields. You get more drifting, like if it's a windy day, and so you get them drifting around the paddock more away from the wind, and you're more likely to get some mismothering and so on with young lambs. So when you have smaller groups and smaller paddocks, but it's there's less of that sort of drifting behavior. But once we've got them stocked for lambing, that's it for like the next 3 or 4 weeks, and we don't want to change. The only exception being that what we do every year, tradition we've done every year, is for each paddock, we record how many ewes go into that paddock. And then at the end of lambing, we make notes, and you can look through those notes and you can say, oh, well, that paddock, we overstocked it last year, or that paddock, we understocked it. And so we'll fine tune the number of animals we put in the following year. And then sometimes you'll have situations where you're not quite sure. And so what you might do is you might have 2 or 3 paddocks that are close to one another where you're not quite sure of the numbers and so on. And there's actually the opportunity in the first week or 10 days that they're at grass before lambing's actually started, where when you're going around in the morning and you're seeing how the grass is growing and how things are panning out, there is the opportunity to open the gate and shove a few through the gate from one field to another and kind of balance things. But once the lambing proper is actually started, we don't want to do anything like that, because it's going to be confusing and you're going to get mismothering, and you hate yourself for it.
So when you're making those notes about, the stocking density in those pastures, like what would be the downside to too few or too many? Like what?
Well, I mean, if you've got too many in there, then there's one of the things they're doing is the ewes are spending too much time going around looking for feed, and so you may get more mismothering. You're not going to get as good a growth rate in the lambs. The ewes aren't going to peak as well in the lactation. It's not going to be as settled. And then the other thing from a grazing point of view is if you've overgrazed it there in the spring, then you've been too hard on it, and then probably for the rest of the season, your subsequent grazings in that field, and you're not going to have the potential growth there that you would have had otherwise, because you were just too hard on it in the spring, and it takes that much longer to recover. And like over the course of the season, you've lost out on growth. And when you're understocked, you're going to get all this long stemmy feed. And because once we're set stock for lambing, there's nothing you can do about that until you finish. So then you've got all this stemmy feed that went to seed. And again, it's the opposite thing, but because that grass hasn't been topped and it's not in the vegetative stage, it's gone to seed, then that's going to affect subsequent regrowth. I mean, you could go in there and top it, or possibly we're looking at the idea you run cattle in behind, but it's nice to have it balanced.
Yeah. So how often are you checking checking ewes and lambs, and what are your priorities during your checks?
Well, we used to do it about twice a day, and then And then I got down to doing it just once a day, partly because to a large extent because the whole system was better set up. The paddock sizes were better. The genetics in the ewes were better. I mean, to give you an idea of the amount of intervention that might occur in terms of lambing ewes, there's a couple of things that can happen. Like either there's a ewe having problems with lambing, and so you got to catch her and lamb her. Well, then if you have to do that, you take her home and you lamb her and you put her in a pen somewhere, and then when she goes back to grass again, she and her lambs will be marked, and so you don't breed from them again because you don't want to breed from animals that you have to assist. And then that's the sort of physical side of birthing, and then there's the kind of psychological side, if you like, that you go around there sometimes and you might see a ewe that's not a good mother and not really owning her lambs. And so you have to catch them both again and put them in a jug or something. And again, when they've got bonded and so on, you'll mark them and they'll go out again, but they won't ever get bred from, because I think that mothering ability is probably, I'm pretty sure it's genetic the same way as physical problems in lambing. Like the physical problems in lambing are probably due to ewes having hips too small or something like that. That's when they got onto easy care lambing in New Zealand in the 60s and 70s. That's what they identified most of the problems, because the ewes had too small hips. And so if you keep, and then something like prolapse too, I think prolapse is hereditary. So if you're dealing with those situations, but then you're culling those animals subsequently, and hopefully you're breeding the whole thing out. And to give you an idea of the sort of scale of it, I would say now for every 1,000 ewes that are lambing out there, during the whole course of lambing, there's maybe 6 or 8 that you have to put your hands on.
Wow.
Wow.
Unless there's some really nasty weather or something like that. But again, it's all planning and preparation, and it's all things that you say when you're getting ready for lambing. To my mind, you're preparing for lambing for a year, or if you like, for years, because of the genetics and because of the way you set your farm up. Yes, it's all, you're building a system.
Yeah.
Well, I'd say under your resume, like deals with high pressure situations well, I'm going to assume, and multitasks really well.
Well, no, because it's a case of kind of like planning. It's a case of designing the system and having the right use for the job. And I'll go back to what I said earlier. Like if somebody's getting into grass lambing and they're not sure about it, I think what they'd have to do is they'd have to have 2 or 3 fields around a barn, and so that they can morph into a more extensive system of lambing out on pasture. But I mean, when we first started, we bought sheep from all sorts of different places, and they didn't know how to do it. And so we were doing that. We were lambing them in 2 or 3 fields around a barn that we had rented, and you were having to do intervention, but you were putting on strong selection pressure, and then we were looking for genetics and getting onto the coop with genetics, and then breeding the whole flock that way. So it's it's a thing it's a system that takes years to build.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you touched on a bit, Mark, about some of those issues when lambing. Would you say that it's the hips? Is that my understanding? The hip size that's probably the most common issues in terms of lambing, like the first 48 hours.
No. I mean, I wouldn't say now. I mean, what I'd say is historically in New Zealand, where they came up with the easy care lambing, they used to, back in the 50s, 60s, they used to go around on lambing beats, like twice a day and so on, and they'd be lambing out ewes, and they weren't selecting. And then people started realizing why are we helping these same ewes consistently and things like that. And then they started focusing on things like hip size. And I mean, it's just physics, right? Like it's just harder for some ewes to have a lamb because they have small hips. I mean, we see and hear the same thing in the human population, right? For some women, it's much easier for them to give birth, and other women have more of a problem because but with animals, I mean, we have the luxury of being able to select for that and say, okay, well, actually, if you don't have very big hips, we're going to select against you. And I mean, if the selection pressure is being applied throughout the system, then you're going to breed away from that. And what I should say is the way we set things up, we always had like a nucleus in the flock where we bred our own replacement rams. And so we were controlling the breeding of our rams as well as the breeding of our ewes. And then the genetics that we've been using for the last 10 years have been we've had Coopworth semen coming in from New Zealand. Well, they've been selecting for easy care lambing, since the 1960s. They set the Coopworth breed up in, I think, the late 60s or early 70s, and that was the whole design of the breed, was that this was going to be a ewe that would rear twins on pasture unassisted.
Yeah. So in that first 48 hours, then what are the more common causes of lamb loss, and how have you addressed those, over the years?
Oh, well, I mean, the thing that it made a big difference, as I said before, once we got on to getting adequate levels of selenium into the ewes and so into the lambs. So you had the lambs are a lot more viable. If the ewes are easy lambers, the lamb is born faster, so there's less stress on the lamb. And the biggest danger then is we're having windy, wet weather, and they might get hypothermic if those lambs are a bit slow to get up, or if the ewes aren't good about cleaning them and getting them up and getting them sucking. And one of the strategies that we had for that is, traditionally we've always put our first-time lambers went to Border Cheviot, because the Border Cheviot lamb is this little streamlined lamb that's born quickly and easily. And then they get right up. They're aggressive little lambs. They get right up and look and suck. And very often, like a first-time mother or hogget, she kind of standing there and she looks a bit stunned because she's never done this before. And she doesn't know what's going on. But these little Border Cheviots have a tremendous sort of will to live. And even if their mum doesn't know what to do, they're in there and they're poking away at their mum and bullying her and getting on and sucking and getting up. They get up quickly. It's very interesting. I mean, I don't want to be in the business of rubbishing other breeds or something, but one year we experimented with putting some taxels over some ewes as a terminal sire over some ewes that we didn't want to breed replacements from. And we keep notes. Another thing we keep notes on through lambing was in every paddock, you keep a note of the dead lambs that you picked up. Well, the lamb loss rate in one side by the taxels was significantly higher, and I think it's because the lamb had a bigger head. It took longer to get born, and I don't think that they're just not as fast to get up and suck when they're born. They're a bit slower, so that's one of those things. But taxels certainly have their place. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, for certainly for people, especially people that are lambing them indoors, and maybe if you wanted to lamb indoors and use taxels, you might have to spend a lot more time shepherding them and intervening. Well, we don't want to do that. So, it didn't suit our system.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Can you describe how behavior at lambing impacts lamb survival? And like, how has this changed compared to what you've experienced like with your first ewe flocks 35 plus years ago?
Yeah. Well, that's right. I mean, I think I've alluded to the fact before that if a ewe is not a very sort of dedicated mother and she's not that interested and sort of wandering away, those ones that you might have to pick up and mother up, well, we're not going to breed from her again. And I do think there's a genetic component to that. So hopefully you breed away from that. And that it's also interesting, like our sheep are because we we don't intervene. What happens when we're going around them and looking them? You can stay on the four-wheeler and you can come right up to them, and you won't upset them as long as you stay on the four-wheeler. If you get off the four-wheeler and you start walking around the paddock, you'll upset them and spook them, and you may actually cause them to go off and miss mother lambs, and then you may have to go and end up catching the ewe and the lamb and so on. So it's a little bit like if people are out walking and they interfere with a fawn that they found born, then the mother may abandon it. So there's a bit of that factor. So I mean, I always say to people that have bought our sheep in the past, I said, well, don't hassle them during lambing. Like, stand back. You probably won't have any problems. I remember selling a flock to a fella. I sold him 80 ewes or something, and he said, well, what am I going to do? And I said, well, don't go near them. I said, like, just go around them on your bike, but don't interfere unless you really have to. And he phoned me up after lambing, and he'd spent lambing with a pair of binoculars, and he'd been looking at them all. He said nothing went wrong. He said nothing happened. I didn't have to do anything. And I said, well, yeah, but so with our sheep, certainly we don't get it, we don't get in and intervene unless we really have to. And that's hard for some people to understand, because a lot of people in Ontario have probably started out by lambing ewes through a barn, and they're used to the fact that you intervene all the time. And by the same token, the ewes are used to that. And so it doesn't really freak the ewes out that you pick the lamb up and you put the ewe and the lamb in a pen, and you can pick up the lambs and she'll follow you there. Well, we can't really do that with ours, because that's not what they're used to. So, you have to be very careful intervening. And as I say, if you're used to lambing through the barn and you want to move over to a pasture lambing system, you're going to have to keep an eye on yourself and make sure that you're not a cause of the problem.
Yeah, good advice. So, staying on that point, if you are giving advice to somebody who wants to get started in pasture lambing, you've talked about organizing pastures around sort of a central barn area. You've talked about the importance of genetics. What other advice would you give to somebody who's getting started in pasture lambing so that they don't have the wheels come off in the first couple of years?
Well, I would say, the thing I said before about body condition score, like, that's something that you want to keep your eye on all year, because there are stages in the production process where it's hard to do something about it. And, to put a condition score back on can take you like a month or 6 weeks or something, of a lot of intensive feeding and so on. I mean, so you don't want to let that drop. So you need to monitor body condition score all year. I think you need to start. I would say an awful lot of what we've done over the years to develop the system we've got is actually looking, like observation, like seeing how things work. And for instance, with a lambing paddock, it may be a certain shape of that lambing paddock, which means that the one end doesn't get properly utilized, or they overutilize part of it, not the other. And so you're looking at ways to sort of subdivide that so they can use it more effectively, and so that they'll graze in a more kind of settled way, and just planning things out, and just keeping your eye on things, and just trying to suss out what's going on all the time. I mean, for years it was the selenium thing was a major breakthrough for us, because when we got that cracked, and we were getting adequate levels of selenium into the lambs, I mean, the tail enders, the problem with tail end lambs, or very weak lambs at birth and so on, I mean, that improved considerably.
Amazing.
Well, fantastic. We got a lot of information.
Yeah.
Is there anything else, Mark, that you think we should cover to producers who are listening here, thinking about maybe a grass-based system and wanting to improve their lamb survivability? Is there anything else that they should know?
Yeah, I mean that it's I think I've alluded to it, like that it's a transition. I mean, to me, it's a sort of natural holistic system that works really well. But I mean, I had the advantage of working for other people in New Zealand for about 10 years and seeing how it worked when you had it properly set up. I mean, and everybody always says, well, they have a much better climate than we do. Well, yes, they do, but I mean, they face challenges from drought and things too. We have a compressed growing season. We have to harvest our surplus grass from that spring flush and use it for our long winters. But we have tremendous opportunity here in terms of land that may be available to rent, or, there's a lot of farms around the country sitting there with facilities that could be used for sheep farming. And I'd say one of the things, like, you've got to build a system, you've got to be patient. It's magic when it's working well, but it just doesn't happen. And I say, if you're coming from a barn lambing system and you want to go onto grass, you're going to have to spend 2 or 3 years kind of morphing over to the system, and it's going to be more work than you'd like at the start. You want to have really good handling facilities so that you can do timely work when you have to, like drenching or vaccinations or sorting, because there's certain times of the year, especially before you've got genetic uniformity and you've got ewes or lambs in varying condition, you might want to feed some better than others. You have to body condition score them and sort them and run them as different groups and so on. And you've got to have handling facilities to do that. The more subdivision you can get on your farm, the more you can control grass, the more you can have things settle at lambing time. The better the watering facilities you can put in. That's on an advantage. Yeah, work on building the system. Like, it's the whole thing. It's building blocks, and you're building it up in stages. But it is challenging and it is interesting, and you can always, if you're looking, there's always ways to do something in a better way or more efficiently. Or I mean, I'm supposed to retired, and I can't, because retirement's boring. There's nothing to do. But if you've got livestock, I've branched out a bit. I'm grazing cattle, and I'm interested in more of the integration of cattle and sheep grazing, which they do in New Zealand, which has tremendous benefits in terms of controlling parasites, and also in terms of controlling feed that's got over mature for sheep, and like topping it with cattle, if you like, so that you can grow more quality sheep feed again. So yeah, there's always things to keep your interest going.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and maybe that's a topic for another interview altogether, is how you're integrating sheep and cattle. That just sounds fascinating in and of itself.
Yeah, very much so.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much, Mark, for joining us today on the podcast. Lots of really amazing, valuable information for our producers, and appreciate your time very much.
Okay, thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. All right.
And thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode of Flock Talk, please subscribe to your podcast app to receive alerts to our future episodes. And please share our podcast with your friends.
For more Ontario Sheep Farmers content, follow us on social media at Ontario Sheep Farmers on Instagram and on Facebook, at Ontario Sheep on X, and visit our website at ontariosheep.org.